Hi guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to show you my process for painting this very cute corgi on a piece of 7x10 Arches cold press paper. That cold press paper means it's really rough. You can kind of see some of the texture there where the light is shining on the wet paper. And that means it is a bit more forgiving with the way I paint. So those edges blur a bit more softly and I can lift and scrub more without it compromising the integrity of that paper. The only downside to the cold press is, for me personally, I don't love seeing the texture of that paper through the finished result of my painting. For Alfie's portrait, I knew I wanted a really soft, glowy background, so that is why I painted in at least that initial wash of yellow first. I know I'm going to continue to kind of scrub out those furry edges to give a softer, more like blurred look to the edges of like his chest and face there. But usually I start with those super dark spots first. So the eyeliner, the pupil, and then the nostrils are areas that I really don't want to lose while I work further into the painting. So like if I were to do a big wash of color near the dog's mouth or around their eyes, I might lose those teeny tiny pencil lines I made that show the very important information of where the painting is the darkest and the value, the how light or how dark something is on a painting is really what gives the most information, more so than the actual color of that spot on the painting. So I always paint those in first because it's so dark, it's so black that if I get some paint over it, down the line working on this painting, it's not going to affect it, and it just kind of gives them a nice layering effect, and it's not going to ruin anything. I'm in this middle stage of the painting now where arguably it's the least fun for me to do, but it's pretty important. Just sketching out details, for lack of a better term. It's not really a loose wash of color at this point. I am using a wet on dry technique, so there's wet ink on my brush, putting it on the dry part of the paper. And that gives me a lot of control over a lot of these little details that are going to be important, that will help signify to Alfie's owner that, wow, yes, this looks like my dog. So I use a dry technique for those little hairs and things that I want to pop out later. And those are also hairs that like I've sketched with my pencil, ones I know that might look important later on. And it's usually the dark. I look for the darkest and the lightest. And the lightest, especially for dogs like this where he's got, a white stripe up his face, I will use an opaque white paint or even like a white gel pen, honestly, whatever works. I've tried to just leave a lot of the white of the paper visible, and it's easy for wide chunks, but for a bunch of tiny little hairs, the best technique for me that I enjoy, that like personally is not going to make me pull my hair out, is simply just adding them back in later. I do not have the patience to leave every little white hair white from the the white sheet of the paper. That's technically like the ideal watercolor technique, but I'm not painting for an art gallery. I'm not painting for an art competition. This is for a pet parent that wants to see a good likeness of their pet. So I do whatever technique I can to make me not hate the process, and I think that's what is important. And most of my watercolor process now at this point is just kind of, I've seen it described as having a conversation with the painting, where you work on one spot, you change the value, like the corner of this ear, and I get it nice and dark to where I think is correct. And then I realize, oh wow, I need to go darker on this dark spot to match the ear that I just did. And now I need to match this dark spot over here to that shadow I just did. And oh, this needs to be a bit warm or a bit more yellow. And with every adjustment I make, it illuminates where I need to make further adjustments on the painting. And I continue that until I feel like it's done. I don't have a set order of, like, oh, I always go light to dark or dark to light, or I always do the nose first and then the mouth and then the eyes and then the ears. I never paint like that. It's really just this loose, casual conversation of me glancing back and forth between the reference photo and the spot I'm working at on the painting until I'm done. Now, I know I needed to go darker on my background in certain areas because I wanted those soft hairs to pop, and I wanted to be able to use like a white marker or white paint with those soft hairs by the ears to show more texture. And even though it doesn't quite match the reference photo value for the background, it doesn't matter. You know, this is my imagination, and I wanted a softer, more diffused blues, greens, yellows look, so I could use that white paint trick I used to, you know, give more texture to the fur. As long as you have the light and dark areas of the photograph similar to what you have in your painting, you can go nuts with color. Pick whatever you want. I feel like that is really what makes a painting mine, you know, is my choice of color from looking at the information from a reference photo compared to a different artist painting that same photo, you know? I really like doing fun things like putting blues or pinks or purples onto white fur, or when I paint black fur, I don't paint with black paint. I use really dark blue or dark purple or dark red even. You guys should go look at my YouTube video I made of the process of me painting a very colorful Shar Pei dog. It was a pretty large painting I did for someone local here in Seattle, and I don't think I use like any actual black in that painting, but it's an all black dog and it's so colorful. So just all that to say, like, experiment, push the envelope of what you think would look good on a painting, because at the end of the day, it's just a painting. You know, it's not life or death. It is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be relaxing. And if you mess it up, you can try again. Even if you're using like fancy arches, cold press paper like I'm using here. But using this paper that you want to do your final portraits on is, you know, just for practice is ideal, because that, you know how that paper works, right? If you never practice on the fancy paper, when you do finally go to use that nice paper, it is, you know, it might behave completely different than you're expecting. And then also, I've run into this too. Paper can go bad. Watercolor paper can go bad. Like something called the sizing, I think that's the glue in the paper, can fail, and then you can't use it. I've tried. So all that to say, use the fancy paper. It's just a painting. It's not the end of the world if you mess up. You can always start over. And having that kind of carefree attitude surrounding the paintings, the portraits, even if it's something you're doing as a gift or as a paid commission, helps you relax. At least it helps me relax and helps me have more fun with the painting. And when I have more fun with it, I think yields the most interesting results. Now, yes, there have been duds. I have messed up paintings before, but again, I just tell myself, Megan, it's just a painting. And it's easy to fall into those negative thought patterns when you do mess up a painting, but it's not just a mistake, right? You learned something from that mistake. You learned, wow, this is how far I can push that paper before I overwork it. Or, wow, I love how bright this blue is, but that is a very staining pigment, and if I put it down, I can't scrub it out later for a highlight. Or, you know, wow, that brush was very stiff, didn't realize it, and it scraped up all the texture on the paper, and now I have a weird spot there. You know, it's all, you learn something every time you make a mistake. Okay, all done with the woo-woo stuff. I am finishing up on this portrait here by scraping out wispy bits of hair that I want to look softer on, what's his name, Alfie's highlights. So I have a firm brush, and I'm very gently taking a little bit of water on that brush and just rubbing it over and then dabbing up the pigment with some paper towel. I recommend using a paper towel that doesn't have texture on it when you do this, because sometimes it will stamp that texture onto the paper, which I don't love, but is what is. So here are my finishing touches. I take some white paint. I talk about this paint all the time. It's Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white. And I use a thin brush. I thin it out in the lid a little bit. You can see me holding that there with some water, and paint little white highlights all over, paint all the pretty little tiny hairs that I like. And then I love finishing my paintings off with splatters of paint. I feel like it adds movement, some vibrancy, some life to the painting. And then I clean up my dark areas with a black marker. If a dog has dark whiskers, I'll use a really thin black micron marker for those whiskers. And he has a lot of little black hairs in his face, so that marker was great for getting those tiny details in there. And I'm finishing up with some brown paint there for those wispies, and yeah, there's Alfie. And here he is with his brother Seamus as a finished set.